Hi there, everyone. My name is Joe, and I'm the Development Associate for the Bristol Poverty Institute. And we're delighted to be co-hosting today's session along with Brigstow. So just to give you a very quick background on the Bristol Poverty Institute, we were established in 2017. So everything that we do is geared towards SDG 1, which is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. So essentially what we aim to do is to grow and develop and support the poverty and poverty relevant research community at the University of Bristol and beyond. We aim to facilitate interdisciplinary approaches and explore the interface of different social, political and environmental dimensions of poverty. And ultimately we aim to do all of that with the sort of end goal of trying to positively affect policy and practice. So I'm always available to be contacted if anybody wants to find out more about what we do. So that's my very quick introduction. So back to you, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I'm going to bounce straight over to Gail Lambourne, who is the manager for Brigstow Institute.
Hi, thanks Debbie and thanks Joe. We are one of the university research institutes. All the research institutes at the University of Bristol have a remit to support interdisciplinarity. Our particular focus is in all aspects of the human experience, or the human and non-human experience. And apart from interdisciplinarity, we do this through supporting co-produced research and also research that involves creative methods. So creativity is built into projects from the outset and is used as a research method. And you're going to be hearing a bit about some of those today. Over the last, how many years? Well, since the beginning of 2016, we've funded around 280 projects now through various means, and we have supported a huge range of partners, from communities to individuals to artists to business. So have a look at our website. We've also now introduced the Brigstow Blends, which is a chance for some informal networking. And if something appeals to you during this chat, we'd love to see you at one of our blends, which also you can find on our website. So thank you, and back to Debbie.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background on the two institutes that are hosting today's. So we're going to start now with the first of our presentations. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to a good friend and colleague of mine, Helen Manchester. She's Professor of Participatory Socio-Digital Futures, based in the School of Education, as she mentioned, and she's going to be talking on the topic of careful co-design, digital innovation with minoritised older adults. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks so much, Debbie. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a project that I ran around looking at digital innovation and working alongside minoritised older adults. So the project was a 3-year UKRI funded Healthy Ageing Challenge funded project, and it looked at how participation in arts, culture and creativity, particularly digital, can influence well-being and a sense of connection as we age. And the project was really about disrupting ageing digital innovation practices that often work with narrow understandings of older adults as being frail and in need of care. And we wanted to go beyond this and to actually include older adults who are minoritised in the process of digital innovation and design. So we started, instead of starting with a technology, we started by asking, what does it mean to understand the local situated everyday lives of older adults, and particularly older adults who are minoritised. So the project really centred the voices, experiences and life worlds of 20, 60 to 75-year-old co-designers, and they all identified as disabled, racially or socioeconomically minoritised or living in poverty, and or 2 or 3 of those identifications. So we worked with them over time, and they were a very mixed group. So we called them co-designers or co-researchers, and that kind of changed during the project as well, and it depended what they were comfortable with too. So they were, as I said, 60 to 75. They participated in the research, the analysis and the design process with us. And they brought to the project a range of assets, including different languages, different literacies, different kinds of digital literacies, a range of creative interests and experiences, and also rich life experiences that we were able to work alongside. I think it's important to say that we worked really closely with 3 community partner organisations: Black South West Network, the Wellspring Settlement, and WESL, which is a disabled people's-led organisation, to not only recruit the older adults, but also to work with us throughout the project to support the work that we were doing and to work alongside and with the co-researchers and with us and with our creative partners, in fact. So very diverse group of older adults. You can see Fanny in the right-hand corner, who has about 15 different avatars that she plays with in Second Life, and Sue at the bottom, who, when we started the project, had not any experience of digital technologies at all. And we have Ruth in the left bottom, who is really creative and into photography and art and story writing, and Ruby, who does a lot of cooking and eating with the family, and that was how she understood her cultural engagements. So I'll try and change the slide. So the design process, or the research process that we adopted on this project, really was very flexible. It was tweaked and reworked as we went, as we worked with the older adult co-designers of our community and our creative partners. And it was a 3-year project starting in year 1 to 2, really working in the communities, in the homes of the older adults, finding out more about their everyday lives, finding out about what mattered to them. And we use creative participatory approaches here, including a My Album activity, which I can say more about later if that's of interest to people. We then introduced the older adults to co-design by working with and in community organisations that were familiar to the co-researchers. And this was a really important phase of the project. So we weren't assuming that they would already be able to engage in co-design processes without having had some introduction to that themselves. In years 2 and 3, we moved into a city centre cultural innovation hub, and there we recruited creative designers, creative technologists and artists to work with the older adults to prototype and come up with some designs themselves for these digital cultural experiences, services or products. And again, I can say more about that if people are interested later. So these were the 6 prototype projects that came out of the project. They were very varied, but they came from all of the research that we did in year 1 and 2 to find out about those situated everyday lives of the older adults we were working with. And the projects came from them, from their passions and from their interests. So they were very different to some of those digital innovation processes I've talked about before. What was interesting, I think, is that they weren't really tech-heavy projects in the end. They very much used mundane technologies and lo-fi technologies that were already familiar to the older adults. There was some pushing of technologies, but not as much as we might have imagined at the beginning. They were also very much about storytelling and very process-orientated as well. I can't say more about them, but I'm happy to later again. So we came up with, by the end of the project, we think we'd worked out how to do what we started to call careful co-design with older adults. And we drew on literature here to try and understand what it was that we were doing. And when we say praxis, we mean the mix of theory and practice. So it's about how we practically did it as well as how we theoretically understood it. So we talk about careful co-design as being place-based, collaborative, community-led and justice-orientated. And you can look at work around design justice and designs for the pluriverse to know more about that kind of approach. We wanted to work with the everyday and unrecognised design practices of older adults, the things that even they might not recognise as design. We had very much intersectional underpinnings to the research. So we were looking at and trying to understand and be responsive to how power was manifested related to identifications related to gender, class, race, age, sexuality, disability, and importantly, I think their intersections. We were really interested, and this came out really strongly from the co-researchers themselves in their connections with more than human relationality. I think Gail mentioned that in terms of what Brigstow are interested in. So we were looking at the affective, embodied, and material way that everyday lives were working, and also how the design processes were constructed, and also their interdependencies, how they related to each other. I think also we're interested in aging as a process, not as something that is necessarily linear, but really trying to understand the emergent quality of space and time and matter as they're entangled in the everyday lives of older adults. So this is the last slide. So our practice of careful co-design had 3 threads that kind of, wove together. Messing too much with my mouse. So the first one of these is working in the thick present, and the thick present comes from Donna Haraway, but also many other authors. You may know it from others, but we see that as an expansive timescale that connects with injustices and transformations that have happened in the past and really recognizes those and thinks about how we might repair those, as also looking at the existence of multiple possible futures as well. So it's not just concentrating on the present. We also, the second thread was about grounding design in the more than just human everyday lives of older adults. And I think this way we were able to engage with their knowledge and their expertise in order to move away from that kind of disembodied and very expert-driven idea of how you might design technologies for older adults. And the last element was really about being very responsive and attentive to what was going on as we were moving through the design process, really thinking about the adjustments and adaptations that we need to make as we were working alongside minoritized older adults. And I guess we were quite inspired by this quote from Miriam Winantz, who talked about the meticulous exploration, quibbling, testing, touching, adapting, adjusting, and paying attention to details that is important. And I think you could relate that element to any kind of research with minoritized communities.
So thank you so much. And we're going to move straight away to Sarah Davis. So Sarah joins us. Sarah is an associate professor in household finance. And she's going to be speaking on exploring financial resilience through a community research and design project. Over to you, Sarah.
So this is based on 2 case studies that took a participatory approach and used community researchers to do this. And they were both conducted in partnership with local community organisations, and as I said, with community researchers. So in one, with Wellspring Settlement and Boost Community, the researchers set out to explore financial resilience in the context of the neighbourhood, and then together to develop ideas to help improve it. And in the other, financial resilience was explored through the needs of mothers, particularly the financial needs of mothers, to understand how the local credit union may be better able to support them. A similar approach was taken in both cases. I was actually only involved in the latter project, but the lessons here draw from both. And I would like to certainly emphasise that Anne Angston-Clark was very involved, led both these projects and very involved in producing these reflections. So I'll just briefly run through how the project was conducted and then talk through 3 key learning points that emerged. So we included the community researchers right from the beginning. So they were involved with helping shape the project, deciding what questions were asked, how they would be asked, and then we discussed ethical and practical issues with them. They were recruited from within the Boost community or were members of the credit union, mothers themselves. So the community researchers then recruited the participants. They led the interviews, the sort of semi-structured interviews with the participants, exploring their financial lives, and they regularly checked in with each other and with the university researchers to share reflections. And then we all took part in sort of co-analysis sessions where we sort of talked through the key themes and insights. And then the groups then held sharing and design sessions where the community researchers presented our findings, suggested opportunities for change, and brainstormed and prioritised ideas for action with members of the partner organisation. And then finally, these ideas were shared with the wider community stakeholders. So for the Boost project, there was a community open day held. And in the case of the project with the credit union, in fact, a further pilot was developed to trial a new product based on one of the ideas that came out of from the project. So that was the Family Saver account. I mean, both these projects worked very well. All involved agreed that we'd all learned a lot from engaging with each other, building relationships and working as a group. But I'm just going to focus on 3 key learnings, I think, from the perspective as university researchers. So firstly, the first learning was about language used. So as we were sort of getting ready for the first workshop with community researchers, one of the questions we reflected on was language and how to use terms that were intuitive rather than needed a lengthy explanation. And one of the words in question was resilience. I mean, it's at the core of the project, so obviously it's very important, but even in academia, I think it can lack a clear definition. So in the end, a few analogies were used instead. So a tree, a growing child, a business during COVID, to try and explore what resilience can look like and to try and develop a joint understanding of it. And the tree, in fact, proved to be the best analogy. Trees need to be strong and flexible at the same time to weather storms. They need strong roots to ground them, and they need sun, water, and fresh air to keep thriving. So in our co-analysis sessions, where the community researchers were sort of sharing their learnings from the interviews and their impressions, rather than talking about resilience, we were asking, well, what's helping this person grow roots? How are they trying to expand their branches? What are they missing to thrive financially? And in fact, in the end, the final framework of resilience was indeed a tree, and this worked across both of the projects. The second learning is write less, talk more. So one thing that became apparent very quickly was that reflecting out loud and talking was a lot easier as a group than writing notes or writing up findings. So after the interviews, the community researchers would get together, debrief together, and then record voice notes summarising what they'd learned in their individual interviews, but also what their impressions were, what their sort of first thinking was. And then they were able to share these voice notes with us in sort of real time. That meant that we were also being part of the process and, you know, keeping up. That we also held regular co-analysis sessions where much of what we did was talk. And so we would start to, but when we were discussing this and developing the themes and insights, we'd actually start recording the findings on large A4 sheets that often just had one word on them, and then using the wall in the room to arrange them to try and show connections or to highlight the gaps. And while this was eventually written up in a more detailed way, actually keeping most of the analysis verbal and tangible on the wall helped us all sort of, I think, work together as a group to create, to reflect together and to keep it as a work in process. And then finally, and this reflection is very much based on Anne's work teaching innovation and design thinking. I mean, she talked about how the design thinking process is full of ingenious facilitation tools and tricks to help you stay creative, but they're often targeted towards a particular kind of person or designer, someone who's been educated in a particular way, somebody who's quick on their feet and feels comfortable expressing their opinions, rather than a tool that might be more accessible and inclusive to those who are new to the process or perhaps more hesitant to engage in something unfamiliar. So for these projects, we were looking for simple tools that helped bring out creativity in everyone without feeling intimidating. So the one-to-all technique is very simple. It's just walking around the room. So first of all, you start off reflecting on your own, walking around the room, taking in what's already been put up there, what's been discussed, then getting together with a partner and discussing your thoughts with one other person, and then in a group of 4, and then lastly as a whole group, or possibly just straight to the group size, depending on the group size, straight from pairs to the whole group. And this provided structure, but also allowed participants to build confidence in their ideas, giving people space to think first before, and then just to share them with one person before sharing them with the room. And I think it also meant that people who really weren't comfortable speaking in front of everybody still had their ideas included, because they'd have discussed it on a one-to-one basis. And so I think, again, this structure was very essential to helping design, to develop these ideas and insights together. So I think that those are just some sort of insights basically into conducting community-based research.
Thank you. Okay. And I'm going to move next to our final speaker. So our last speaker is Camilla Morelli, who joins us from social anthropology, where she's a senior lecturer, and she's going to talk on the topic of animating the future, amplifying youth voices in Amazonia through animation co-production.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Right, so I'll start. Could you move on to the next slide, please, Carrie? So I'm a senior lecturer in social anthropology here at the University of Bristol, as Debbie was saying, and the photographs you can see here, these are photographs from my field site, from the community in Amazonia, where I've done research for the past 15 years, and I work mainly with children and young people in an indigenous community we're called the Matses. So the Matses have very recent history of contact with the national society. And what I have seen in my years of research is that there's a huge intergenerational difference, in the sense that people who are into their late adulthoods and elderly years, they're very happy, they're very fulfilled by living a life in close connection with the forest environment. Whereas the children, like they told me in their own words, are dreaming of concrete. The children want to go away from the forest, they want to live in the city, they want to be in a place where they can watch television and have electric light. And what I saw in these 15 years of research, thanks also to Briggs, who has supported this work, is that the children have started to grow up and to move away from the forest and to go to the city, where they find a series of really deep challenges. And if you could go on, please, Carrie. So this is, again, please, I think twice more. So this process of this movement is leading to a really major process of heritage loss. And this is affecting not just the Matses, but indigenous communities across the world. So the UN estimates that by the beginning of next century, 80% of all indigenous languages will be entirely forgotten. And with them, entire bodies of knowledge that are really foundational to indigenous cultural identities will also be gone. And this is creating a growing anxiety in all generations, the older and the younger. Could you move ahead again, please? So, for example, it has been documented by the very limited research done on this topic that, and including my own work, what I have seen in my research is that this heritage loss is creating anxiety, and the young people are paying a very, very high price for it. And indeed, indigenous youth suicides are on the rise globally, and part of this is the cause behind it is this feeling of no longer being part of their own heritage, and at the same time feeling displaced in the world. So in response to address this issue, I have started developing a highly collaborative, co-produced participatory research with young people in Amazonian communities. including indigenous young researchers. And could we have the next slide, please? And what we are doing is that we are using co-production of animated films as a form of research, as a method of research, but also as a technique to achieve impact. So what I'm doing is that I am leading these teams that bring together indigenous communities, young junior researchers, but also professional artists and animators. And we are teaching young people how to produce animated films from start to finish, so that by the end of our work, they're fully capable to produce animations by themselves. And with these animations, what they do is that they document unrecorded heritage. They also find a way to engage with this heritage, especially the children who haven't learned much of the knowledge that the elderly people have. By making these animations, everybody learns about this heritage, but also then we use the films to feed, to report to policymaker and international agency what these young people dream for their futures, and also the obstacles they face to achieve the futures they desire, to try and embed these voices and these needs that for the most part are unheard into policy making. So if we could have the next slide, please. These are examples of two films made by young people. One is about women's rights, where a group of young women we work with imagines a world where a society where the first indigenous woman becomes president of Peru. And then what this president woman does is that she goes back to the community and she trains other women on how to get scholarships to study and to have a kind of better access to education. And the other one, Vision for the Future, is an animation about Roldan, who is actually my collaborator, who is the first anthropology graduate in not just in his community, but in his entire population. And so what we are doing, if we can have the next slide, please. What we're doing is that we are now working with UNESCO and with the Ministry of Education in Peru to see how this methodology can be, based on co-production, can be embedded in the official school curriculum for indigenous children that will lead to large-scale documentation of unrecorded heritage, but at the same time it will lead to large-scale digitalization in rural areas where children remain digitally excluded, essentially. And last year, actually, I also joined a Bristol Poverty Institute panel at the UN General Assembly in New York, where we presented this work to UNICEF. And one thing that really struck me is that everybody was saying at UNICEF, they were saying, oh, we really lack kind of research that uses child-centered methods that elicit children's own perspective and then embed this in development planning. So that it kind of made me see what the relevance of the co-produced approaches that we can take, like the relevance that these approaches can have. Yes, so I'm just going to end here, if we can have the last slide. So I talk about this research in my book, and there's my emails, and in my policy work, if you want to hear more. Thank you.
Really inspiring. Thank you so much, Camilla, and great to see how the work's developed. Okay, so that's all our presentations. There was a question from Catherine to Helen. So perhaps we can take this now. Helen, how did you identify the community groups you worked with?
Yeah, so thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Debbie. So I guess as I was writing the bid, partly it was organisations that I'd worked with before, but it was also thinking about what would be particularly relevant for this particular piece of work. So as I was writing the bid, I had a lot of meetings with different community sector organisations and spoke to them about the roles that they might play in the project. And I guess it was really about speaking to them about what they might gain from it, and how we might work together, and establishing who would be good organizations to work with in terms of what we needed to do. But it was also kind of a co-created role, I suppose, through talking to them. I think it was also really important for us to have, because we were looking at people who are minoritized by race and disabled communities, that we had disabled people's led organizations and organizations that were working with Black, Brown and other community organisations across Bristol. So for Black South West Network, they were an obvious partner, and Westall as a disabled people's led organisation were also an obvious partner. In terms of the poverty side, I think I already had existing relationships with Wellspring Settlement, so it was quite an easy place to approach and work with. And, you know, a lot of the work they do, as Sarah's presentation showed, because I think Boost is also run by Wellspring Settlement, relates to people who are living in poverty. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Helen. Does that answer your question, Catherine?
I was just going to say, I think the university has quite strong ties with the Wellspring Settlement and is actually trying to sort of bring the university to Barton Hill through these connections. So, you know, there's a long established sort of, you know, community there now.
I should also mention there's a new micro campus, which is what is called, opening in South Bristol as well. The Gateway Centre in
Hartcliffe.
Yeah, it's Hartcliffe. Yeah. So those are really good opportunities if people want to work with particular kinds of communities to do it through existing relationships.
Thank you. Camilla, how are you getting on? Because we've got a few questions popping up, which I could take, or
I just sent it to.
You just sent it.
See, they're not receiving it.
Okay.
I've just received it, so maybe do one more question, and then we can go to Camilla.
Okay, so I've got a question from Becky Langford. Loved hearing about the verbal analysis approach you use, Sarah. Sounds like a great way to create equality between all the team members. How did you move from the verbal analysis into writing up, and how were the community researchers involved?
Oh, thanks, Becky. Yeah, I mean, the writing up was largely done by us as university researchers, but the language used, the ideas had been, you know, what was written, what was co-created during the sessions largely. The community researchers were just, I mean, just to be clear, they were co-credited as authors on anything that we wrote up. So we worked with Policy Bristol for both of these to produce a you know, policy briefing, to which the community researchers were also co-authors on that. I mean, I think apart from in the case of some language barriers, I think it's also an ask to expect people to do the writing, as we all know, writing is not an easy job necessarily. So, but we obviously checked it with them to show that they were happy with the final written output.
We do have a couple of comments from Naomi in the chat. So Naomi said, it's great hearing about these creative methods. I'm interested from two angles. I'm just at the beginning of designing my PhD research and developing small wood enterprises in Tanzania, using ethnographic methods to keep deep insights to inform enterprise development programs. So there's a follow on there, the empowering. So I'm also looking for a research partner for an NGO I lead that has done really innovative work in poverty reduction through mindset transformation to stimulate self-employment. One fascinating part has been empowering street children to join a savings scheme, and they've saved $2,000 plus in 8 months, and 40 have used their money to move off the streets into rented accommodation, supporting their families. Anybody interested in exploring a research project around this approach, please reach out. And she gives her email address. Camilla, I don't know if you want to respond to those comments.
Yes, so I think, well, I think that in terms of like it's great to have in mind from the start when you design a PhD project this kind of let's say, yeah, co-production and impact kind of aspect, I think, because when I did my PhD research, it was the world was very different, and I didn't have in mind any of this kind of, these debates were just not there. Like, how do you do research that is co-produced? Some people had said something sometimes, but it wasn't nowhere near at the level that we regard this kind of co-production today. And so I think it's great to have in mind from the start that, the research can be research that is not just I go to a community somewhere and I get some information, then I come home and I write about it, but it can be research that has an input from the community you work with from the very outset, which can also be like I go there and I say, I have some resources to do this work. What can we do together? What will help? So yes.
Thanks.
That's brilliant advice. Thanks, Camilla. Yeah.
Was there anything else, Naomi, you wanted to ask anybody from the presentations about the work?
I think it's just given me really open my minds a bit to some of the possibilities, and it's like peeping through to a new world, really, because I think there's such working in the international development sector, there's just such an emphasis on traditional quantitative research, and we know that's kind of lacking in so many ways. So I'm really excited to explore more, and because of the creativity, I think the sky's the limit, really, isn't it? There's that's just 3 snapshots, completely different methods, different contexts. So I think I'm feeling really inspired and really appreciating the chance to learn about these, and daunted as well to think, okay, so how much would you need to scope first to understand what's out there before you even choose and design your methods and have a robust rationale for the methods that you end up choosing? I think that's daunting, but that's fine. That's a good challenge to have.
Do any of our panelists want to respond to that particular question? Ellen.
Come in. Hi, Naomi. Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of the creative methods, I guess it's quite important just to be using methods that chime with the people that you're working alongside. So, but also introducing new things to them. So we started by using this album and photographs that people were showing us on their phones all the time anyway, and collecting those photographs into one place and curating those, the older adults curating those themselves. But then we started introducing filmmaking and also did stop frame animations with older adults. So I guess it's starting from something familiar, but not necessarily sticking with the familiar either, and working from that. So yeah, find a starting point, but don't see that as an ending point necessarily, I guess. And the methods can be co-created throughout together with the people that you're working alongside, perhaps.
Thanks, Helen. And I think, Camilla kind of inferred the importance of not being extractive in the methods that you work with and the way that you work with communities, particularly when we're thinking about, research with vulnerable communities. There's got to be some trade-off, there's got to be some benefit to those communities. And, if it's about researchers helping to escalate their voices about particular issues, as in Camilla's work, for example, then those things are really important to consider. What are those benefits? And it's not always, it is about remuneration for people's time, and we would always really encourage that people's time is paid for, but often it's much more than that. It is about skills development, it's about the legacies that you leave, and it's about the kind of ongoing impacts for those people once you leave. So we always talk about that sort of non-extractive approach. Thank you. There is another question that I'm just going to take from Fiorella. Thanks for the inspiring presentations and experiences. I'd be really grateful to hear from the presenters about considerations about their positionality in conducting research with potentially vulnerable communities. What did you consider before embarking on the work? What conversations do you think it's important to have with co-researchers, and any other suggestions? That's a big question. Who would like to take that one from our panelists?
I'll have a go. I think it's a shame that Anne isn't able to be here, because she's actually submitted a paper talking about reflections of conducting community research, and actually interestingly, Becky, I was just looking at it now, and she offered the co-researchers the opportunity to co-write the paper, to co-author the paper, and they actually preferred to be a participant in that. So I think yeah, that's quite interesting, and I think also that the emphasizes the importance of verbal communication within co-production. I mean, I think the important thing is that the community researchers feel comfortable doing it, that they are given the support that they need to be able to sort of move into that role. And as I said, generally speaking, in both the projects we undertook, they grew in confidence a lot, and very much were very pleased with the new skills they developed themselves as being part of the project. I think taking time, I guess, would be one thing to think of. It should be a much slower process of giving people the opportunity to build up their skills as a researcher before they go out to interview people, build up their analysis skills, that it's a very iterative process that is genuinely collaborative, not being pushed to a timescale that might suit the university researchers.
Thank you. Some really important reflections there. Camilla or Helen, did you have anything you wanted to say in response, Camilla?
Yes, sure. So yeah, it's a really good question. For me, I think I'm in a bit of a different position because I work mainly with communities that I started working with 15 years ago with the Maths year the first time, and then I go back every single year for 2-3 months. So by this point we are very close. I know them very well, and I know what, so they kind of expect me in the summer. So that creates a whole different kind of relationship, right? It's a relationship based on trust. And then what I do now, what is my priority now, is to make sure that, for example, I work with some young maths who are university students. And so what I want to do is that I'm training them so that they have skills that will allow them to develop in their kind of career and future trajectories. So I mentor very closely my collaborator and friend who is, as I was saying, the first anthropologist there. So we co-publish together, for example, things like that. But then, for example, this summer, we are also going there to co-produce with the community a kind of major documentary film that will be aimed at, so this will be a commercial documentary, so aimed at TV, something like that. And what we're doing is that we are going to train the community on filmmaking. And we are asking Sony, the filmmaker is a Sony ambassador, so we are asking Sony to give us a couple of cameras so that we can live with them. And then one young maths will work as assistant director. So it's like the projects are aimed at creating opportunities for the participants. That's the kind of idea.
Brilliant. Thank you, Camilla. Helen, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, I just had someone arrive to pick up a sofa. That's why I had to run out. What was the question? Sorry.
So the question's in the Q&A, and it was about your positionality in conducting research with potentially vulnerable communities. Yeah. What did you consider before embarking on the work? What conversations do you think is important to have with co-researchers?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really important question, actually. Part of me is a bit uncomfortable with the idea of vulnerable communities itself. I guess I would want to push back a little bit on that sometimes. At the same time, I think there are some really important issues that you want to consider. So in terms of that idea of vulnerability, I guess I would take an asset-based approach to the communities that I'm working alongside, and not necessarily see them as vulnerable. But I think I think our relationships with the community partners were really vital here. So we spent quite a lot of time with the community partners, finding out more about their experiences of working with those communities, what the issues that they had found had arisen. And then also, I think there's something about just being really, I guess that question of when I was talking about careful co-design, this sort of idea that you're always being responsive and attentive to what's coming up. So we had methods, we had diary methods, for example, and we found that some of the co-researchers really didn't want to do that, partly because they were dealing with experiences of trauma from previous life that meant that they were struggling in their everyday lives to kind of just getting along with what was happening in their everyday lives, and writing that down wasn't necessarily a positive experience for all of them. So we were very flexible as well when it came to the methods that we used, and we let people use different kinds of or we negotiated with them the kinds of ways that they would interact with the methods that we designed. I think the question of positionality, though, it's also really important, and that question around power and the power that we have and we hold as researchers, and never forgetting about that. And as a white sort of woman who enjoys certain kinds of privilege in the world, just really continually reflecting on that, and the way that the power relations between me and the older adults I was working alongside play out at different times. So it's something that we've written about as well. We're trying to engage with those questions of power and positionality in our writing as well, and in thinking about how we do co-design. I think it's a really important part of the work to think about our response abilities, I'd say, following Karen Barrett, but in the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Helen. Okay, I can't see any more questions in the Q&A. I keep flicking between, but I've just asked Gail if she could pop in the chat a whole load of links to other resources that might be useful. Camilla has also put in the chat the slide with her books and other outputs. Helen's put in a few of her publications which might be relevant, and there's a number of links here which may well be interesting or relevant to you. So the first one, The Wounds We Keep, looking at how working with non-professional actors can be carried out in an ethical way. This was one of our funded projects quite recently. The Race Charter for Co-Production through an Anti-Racist Lens is something that we supported in a small way, but it's a piece of work that was done by Black Southwest Network with colleagues in space. There's a link to ethical storytelling of psychoactive substances and policy in Bristol. So that is a piece of work that has resulted in some ethics guidelines about how you include people who are substance using in research in ethical ways. We've got lots of toolkits which support you with co-production, and Gail's going to be catching up with me in a minute. The last thing we were going to post as well is a link to some of the co-production training that we offer, which I think is full for our April training, but we will be offering another date in the summer. But you can at least see from the April date what the training would comprise, and that's facilitated by a wonderful artist that we've worked with called Hannah Mumby, who kind of takes you through the whole process of what co-production is and how you might be able to, you might think about using co-production in your research. So it's a really engaging, interesting kind of process. Okay, Sharon, you had your hand up, I think. So can I just take your question?
Oh yeah, I did. I just wrote it. I think we just missed each other on the Q&A. Basically, you've been talking about ethics in practice, I guess, and situational ethics, but I was wondering, tying in with that, really, the sort of challenges of gaining ethical approval, because from what people are saying, they're being very reflexive and very, flexible and responding to the participants. But I just wondered how that works in practice, because as somebody who's sort of trying to go through the ethics procedure at the moment, and obviously it's a bit more time bound because it's a PhD, I guess, than if you had a sort of funded project over a period of years. But I just thought that must be quite a challenge. So I wondered how people managed it.
Does anybody want to take a question about ethical approval? Helen?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, so obviously a 3-year project. They asked us to write our 3-year ethical approval at the beginning of the project. which I kind of asked, do I really have to do that? And they said yes. And so we did do that. But yeah, you're right. It was a continual process of going back. So we can do addendums. And so what we did is when we wanted to change things, if they didn't seem to fit into the ethical approval that we'd already gained, we went back to the ethics committee and asked them to relook at something. And it was, I mean, I think at Bristol there, or certainly in social sciences, arts and social science faculty, they're quite used to that now and quite good at responding pretty quickly to those addendums as well. So we found that usually we would get a response within 10 days to 2 weeks if we put in an addendum, which was really, really good and worked really well for us. So yeah, that's how we did it. Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to respond on that particular question? No. I think I've just been consulting with Gail in the background. We are doing a piece of work from Brigstow and are in discussion with the newly formed kind of university ethics structure and Matt Brown, who heads that up from Arts and Humanities, about developing some simple guidance for people to navigate ethics review using co-production. So that's a piece of work we're actually working on at the moment. I can't promise when that's going to be available, but I think we all sort of appreciate that through different ethics committees, you know, I think arts, law and social sciences have been pretty responsive and pretty able to kind of pick up on the nuances of co-production, which mean that we can't set ahead of time exactly what we're going to be doing with our participants or our co-researchers. I think in other parts of the university, there's more pushback. And particularly for researchers in health areas who are also having to go for NHS ethics at the same time, that becomes really complicated. So, you know, we've been supporting projects who are doing both of those processes, and you know, it's no mean feat, but it is possible. I think you've got to be very resistant, and I think you've got to be very patient with the process. But as Helen said, you know, I think also just being strong about saying, well, you know, we can't predefine everything, and we will come back to you if things change. And I think that's really important, that you don't just sort of leave it open-ended and don't inform ethics committee if things do change. And there are some changes that obviously don't need to go through ethics committee, but there are others that do need some sign off. So it's being aware of those.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Cheers, Sharon. Any other last comments or questions? Can I just go through the panel very quickly for any last comments? Camilla, did you have any last comments for our audience?
Yes, I was just thinking about this ethics process because, again, when I did my PhD, which was exactly 15 years ago when I started, I don't know, everything was very different. And, you know, like I don't think that anyone in my department had the coordinates of where I was. They had no idea, you know, it was very sort of as you go and come back with some data. And so, and obviously things have changed very much. Obviously, when you start, I think there are some kind of things where you really need to be strong and prepared. And you need to know, and also for yourself, you don't absolutely want to end up in a situation where there's some kind of ethical issue that would be it would be very, you know, challenging. But yes, in terms of doing your application, obviously, you know, because I've been going there for so long now I can draw my expertise. So the first time that you do this is the most complicated, then it becomes easier and easier. Obviously, now you have to think about a whole new set of issues. For example, social media. You know that once you're going there and there are images produced, they're going to be online for sure. And one thing that I love that I've seen change in my field site is that when I started going to the Amazon, I was the one with the camera. And actually, I started using participatory photography and giving kids cameras, and they just thought that was incredible. You know, they had never even touched a camera. And the ethical, so the kind of ethical imbalance was that I had the camera or the cameras to distribute, and people were being taken photographs of. So the ethical question was, are you taking a photograph of me? That was the thing that could upset people. Now I swear, as soon as I get there, someone takes photos and puts them on the internet. You know, now everybody has cameras, and even in the middle of the Amazon, everybody has a smartphone and takes photos of you and puts them on the internet. And the real ethical issue now is, did you not tag me on the post you made on Instagram or Facebook? This has changed completely, and you need to be prepared in a sense to this changing world too.
Thank you. Really good advice there, Camilla. Sarah, can I come to you for any last comment?
Yeah, I mean, more just a reflection actually on what Helen and Camilla have talked about. I mean, I was thinking really about timescales and building relationships. I mean, I think co-produced research is most effective over a longer period of time, where you have a real opportunity to build a deep relationship, to build trust, and to empower the co-researchers to get what they want out of it. But I think, and I should say that actually with both the projects that Anne was involved with, there were existing relationships with the organisations, which I think at least went some of the way. But I think it is still possible to use you know, sort of the co-production techniques, considerations in a smaller, more discrete project as well, particularly if the outcomes are directly relevant to the people involved.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think emphasising that relational aspect to co-production, you know, is really important. And, you know, we've got a really deeply embedded relationship in Camilla's example. But as you say, you know, for many researchers, you know, they don't have the luxury of that kind of long-term relationship with their communities, with their co-researchers. But it's about a value-based work and how you kind of approach people in the research that you do that's really important. Helen, last thoughts from you.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose just to carry on from that place, really. Certainly, if you're a doctoral researcher, I think it can be really hard to do to adopt collaborative, co-produced approaches, or not necessarily approaches, but maybe to do all of it. And I think there's a sense that there's a true way of doing it and there's only one way of doing it. And I think I would say that's not at all true. And really to consider how you, as Sarah was suggesting, you might take on elements of a collaborative approach in a PhD, in a doctoral project. And what those might be, just you need to carefully negotiate and work out what those are and what's not possible as well. Because in a sense, a PhD is a very individual project. It still is. It doesn't have to not involve collaboration. But at the end of the day, you have to write a thing that somehow reflects what you've done. So I think really being clear and setting expectations at the beginning with partners as well about beginnings and endings and what's possible and what isn't possible with the funding or the non-funding that you have is really important as well. And I think the other thing in relation to power, I suppose, is recognizing the power of the university, both to support people to get there, to become more visible in the world, but also as a kind of barrier to collaboration sometimes, and recognizing that that might be the case as well, particularly with communities who have felt like universities have not been there for them in the past, and in fact actively worked against them and created unjust situations and experiences for communities. So I think really recognizing that if you're going in to different communities is so important too. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up here. I think we've had some really interesting conversations, and I'm really pleased to have hosted our presenters today. 3 very different projects that have given you hopefully some kind of live examples as to how you might do this work. So thank you so much to Helen, Camilla and Sarah. Also big thanks to Joe and Gail for all their organisation and getting this set up in the first place. And if anybody wants to know more, just get in touch with us. You've got links to both BPI and to Brigstow, and I'm sure people will be happy for you to drop them a line if there's more specific questions. So I'm going to leave you there, and thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.